I'm not so close to the camera. The last time I was recording, the camera kind of looked like it was looking up my nose. So it wasn't too bad, but
Was there a boogie?
not that I saw. But I didn't watch the whole thing. Zach, you watched the whole thing, so it was.
There may or may not have
Okay.
been a boogie.
Yeah. So everybody's a comedian. So
Leave it to me. No,
did you guys go anywhere on spring break? Well, Griffin, you went home.
Yep.
We went to Maryland.
You guys worked.
The marathon. Yeah.
Oh, you guys worked the 5K, right? For the
Yes.
Run for Their Lives, right?
It was awesome.
You had to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning to be out there and all that stuff. Yeah.
That was incredible.
Yeah. Yeah.
I played with the cute puppy the whole time.
Yeah. It's good to know you were working hard.
What? No.
she was really working her biceps and triceps on
Working
her
with.
puppy.
Yeah. Okay. Well, if you recall, I gave you guys the Biblical Master's Proficiency Instrument. How many of you took it?
I took it and I sucked.
I forgot. I got to question like 13 and realized that.
Did nobody take it?
Mine was in Spanish.
You said you quit it. Like,
No, and I sucked.
oh, you suck, but you did the whole thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. Good. Anybody else?
Mine was in Spanish.
I went halfway through.
Okay. Well, Andrea gets the 10-point for whatever project you want. So help remember that for me. But that was a full on. That's a full letter grade. So that's a big jump there. I was on Facebook today and I saw a friend of mine who is transferring his credentials from the Assemblies of God to Open Bible, and he posted a picture, and I just messaged him and asked him. I said, "Who's giving you the exam?" And it was the first part, the first 300 questions, and they require them to get a 75% in order to be able to transfer their credentials in those first 300 questions, plus essay questions and all that stuff. So I told him good luck, because it's pretty extensive. So
Wait, how many times did it take?
that's a good question. That's a good question. I don't. Yeah,
Did you see my Facebook post?
I didn't read it.
Oh.
Will you share it? Go ahead, share it.
I'm reading your sober today and you're diving saved.
That's great. Yeah.
Woo! No, I like when I was talking about a prayer earlier this morning, and I just feel like we're gonna run around the building because I was just so excited.
That's good. That's good. We celebrate with you.
Amazing, man.
Did you say 8 years sober?
1 year.
I thought you said 8 years sober. Because I'm thinking, would you start drinking at 10?
No,
So-
no, I'm 1 year sober.
Okay. Well, that's great. That's fantastic.
I'm 8 years.
That's good. I'm at 39 years sober. So, but, well, that's
You're
awesome.
doing better than me.
I've had more time. So it was a big weekend for Heather. She ran the full marathon for that one city marathon. So I have never felt compelled to run 26.2 miles.
Your wife is so awesome.
They ran 5 hours flat. So yeah, they were shooting for 4.5 and just decided to enjoy themselves a little bit more. And so her and April McReynolds, they ran it together. And so this past Saturday was the first Saturday in like 8 months that she hasn't had some running thing to do. So, because they've been training since like August, and
26 miles?
26.2. Don't forget the 0.2.
That is
Do you know why it's 26.2? Does anybody know?
Because it's 26.2.
Metric? I don't know.
Well, when it was first in the Olympics, it was originally 25 miles, but because of the course layout and where the stadium was, they had to extend it 26 miles, and then because of where the grandstands were, they had to move the start line again and the finish line so that the royal family could see the finish line. So that's where the 0.2 comes in from when it was in the Olympics. So 26.2. So apparently, if you are important enough, they'll move start lines and finish lines for you if you're in the royal family. So that doesn't happen.
I'm totally in the royal family.
Are you in the royal family?
I'm special.
Okay. Short bus special. All right. Well, hey, let's open up with a word of prayer. And then I want to talk a little bit about our last class, and then we'll get into our conversation for tonight. I doubt we'll get through everything tonight. Part of it's what was on the video a couple weeks ago when we had the snow day, just to see if there's any conversation that we want to have about that. But I just want to have good dialogue tonight, talking about leading with vision and the life cycle of organizations, and just some of how that functions in church. So let's pray and let's get started. Father, we thank you for this day. We thank you for the opportunity we have to worship you and praise you. I pray that tonight's class would be fruitful and beneficial for everyone, that we would have some good conversation, that we would have some good reflection on what you're doing in each of our lives, and that you just continue to speak to our hearts, speak to our minds, and bless each person here. In your precious name, amen. Amen. All right, so let's think a little bit about the... Oh, come on now here. Let's get the controller working here. Let's think a little bit about the biblical-centered leader that we talked about a couple weeks ago now. Andrea, I appreciate you doing the. Is it Andrea or Andrea?
Both.
Which one do you want?
Andrea.
Okay, Andrea it is. Because people have preference, so I would rather say the right one as opposed to, like there was one kid here a couple years ago that. He let me call him Garrett for 2 years. He's like, it's Jarrett. I'm like, well, why didn't you tell me it was Jarrett 2 years ago? So don't let us do that.
Well, I mean, my mom doesn't call me Andrea or Andrea. I don't go by my first name at home, so it doesn't really matter.
What do you go by at home?
Berenice.
Okay, I'm not going to call you that.
So it doesn't really matter what you call
I'm
me.
not going to. Yeah, I'm not going to call you that.
Try it.
No,
Try it.
no.
Venice.
No, I'm not going to do it. It's like a friend of mine that I grew up with at church. We called him Jason, and then we were out in public, and somebody yells at him, "Hey, Doug!" And we're like, and he answers, we're like, "Who the heck's Doug?" He goes, "Oh, I'm Doug." We're like, "Doug's your middle name?" He goes, "No, Doug's my first name." We've been calling him by his middle name for like 5 years before we knew his first name was Doug. So this dude had like 3 first names. His name was Douglas Jason Alex. So any one of those he would have gone to. But I appreciate you doing the because how long did it take you?
Like days.
So you didn't sit down in one session and do it.
No, it was almost like my go-to when I was bored.
I'm bored. Let's see how I know the Bible. But hey, you're the only one that did it, so that's great. That's great.
Hey,
So you did have okay. What's that?
I thought we had until the end of semester.
You were incorrect. I said you had to have it done by today. So
At least I'm being honest.
yeah. Well, I mean, I put you all on your honor, so I appreciate none of you lying about it. That's good. I mean, I would have given you credit if you had lied, but I know there were at least 2 that didn't because they left their copy here. So yeah,
So if you had lied,
yeah, we could do the Don Meyer, who's the president of Valley Forge. I think I told you this. He always used to tell us in Pentateuch. He was the last class he taught at North Central was I took in my freshman year, and it's Pentateuch. He taught the first 5 books of the Bible, and he'd always tell us if you cheat, you have Jesus' blood on your diploma, and you have bloody diplomas. And so we could do that same thing, but it just always sounded cheesy because he kind of has a mousy kind of voice. So, but reflecting on the class from a couple weeks ago, was there anything that has changed in your behavior since that class? Are you doing anything different, Andy?
For me, I know most of my Devo times that I did, and I'm still working on getting that every day. It's still a process for me. But it always turned into a Bible study, and it didn't seem very relational. It wasn't fun. I didn't like
Sure.
it because the whole time I was studying, and then I'm like, oh, I can use this for that Devo next week. And
Right.
I always had some type.
You're always working.
Some type of academic to it. And so I started, took your advice and started reading, just reading, not studying, not working on it. So I started in 1 Kings, and I'm like halfway through or whatever. So I just read a little bit a day, and it seems to be much more enjoyable that way, as opposed to trying to what can I get out of this all the time.
Was there any reason in particular you landed in 1 Kings to start?
I think you mentioned it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
He was torn between that and
Okay. Yeah.
I like
Or
stories.
Lamentations or something, but
I like stories.
He was trying to decide, did he want the priestly point of view or did he want the...
I like 1 Kings. I like 1 Kings. I like some of the Old Testament books for sure. So, anyone else?
I have terrible memory. I don't remember 3 weeks ago.
Okay. Well, appreciate your honesty. See how that plays out for you on your final paper.
it's literally like whatever.
Yeah. I appreciate your honesty of not remembering what we've been speaking about. So that's good. We're talking about becoming a biblically centered leader in the context of having a ministry that lasts. So And the Andy, the thing I appreciate about what you shared there is just that, it's so easy for Bible study to become a chore, and it's just what we do. And so, Zach, you said after you watched it that you really appreciated it. That it was something you needed to hear. Actually, I think you posted that on YouTube. It's something you needed to hear at the time. And I hope that you guys really take to heart. And I speak from personal experience of how easy it is to get off track in Bible study, in using the Bible as bread as opposed to just a tool. And oftentimes, especially in the busyness of ministry, and it doesn't matter what size church you're at, whether you're at a church of 75 or 750 or 1,000, what doesn't matter. Every ministry position is busy. It depends upon the size of your church, depends upon what kind of busy it is and what roles you're doing. But there is no lack of work to be done. But it's so easy to not make the time to spend time reading the Bible. It's so easy to not make it a priority. And that's how you hear all of these ministers that they walk away, or they I heard this phrase the other day, which I don't really like that much, but they make a choice that disqualifies them for leadership, which is just a pretty way of saying they sinned big and got in trouble. So just a good friend of mine from college just had an affair on his wife, and as a missionary. Yeah, as a missionary. And it was his second sexual sin. And so in the Assemblies of God, on your second, you don't get the opportunity for restoration. They just dismiss you not from membership. I mean, we don't excommunicate people, but they do dismiss. He does not have the opportunity to be licensed again with the assemblies, and most other denominations probably won't either. So how does that happen? And that's the question I had with him when I called him, because he and I have a good relationship. And I would talk a couple times a month, how are things going, and I just finally said, dude, what the heck happened? And he's like, I just got so busy, and this was somebody and it was somebody that was also in the ministry at the church they were attending, and he found somebody that an ear to listen, a shoulder to lean on, and used that as their source of strength and encouragement, as opposed to God in their relationship. And so we can talk about this in leadership, and we can talk about all these other things in leadership. But understanding that our foundation in ministry is what makes the biggest difference for longevity in ministry. It is so easy for people to get sidetracked, and they just become distracted. And so, where we first start in this conversation on our leadership, the first point we said, the heart of the leader directly impacts his or her ability to lead. We could spend a year just talking about that. And if we understand in the context of leading in a church, the importance of ensuring that we continue to stay tied in to the Word of God, to the Spirit of God, and to being in God's presence, if we understand that, it helps us set up a long-term success for ourselves. Clinton's material said 1 in 3 leaders. Only 1 in 3 leaders finish well. 1 in 3 leaders. So what, we got 5, we've got 9 people in here. So three of the people in this class, according to Clinton's statistics. Now, obviously, you guys can be ahead of the curve. But the reality is that I can go back to the number of people I graduated with at Bible college that have walked away from ministry. Understand, when I went to North Central, they were still predominantly a ministry training school. That's what they were focusing on. And I can track back. I mean, there's some guys, they've fallen off the face of the planet. We can't find them anywhere. And other graduates, we're looking for them because they had some blow up at a church and just disappeared. And it's not that there's not a life outside of ministry, but here's the reality. If God has called you to ministry as a career, how sad is it for you if you make a decision that prohibits you from fulfilling that call? And it can happen so easy, so quick. And it starts by straying from what God's word says and our connection and our relationship with him. So I don't want to go back all through that lesson that we talked about previously, but I can't emphasize enough, and I'm not, don't get me wrong, I'm not giving anybody a hard time about not taking the exam or anything. I mean, that was a whole optional thing. But I want you to really chew on that of how are you doing on staying connected. And here's the challenge that we can face as a Pentecostal movement, a Pentecostal denomination, is that oftentimes we put experience in worship, experience in services and stuff, we put that before connecting with God through his word. If Baptists, it's the other way around. It's all about study and not about experience. Pentecostals, it's all about experience and not about study. They go hand in glove. So let me encourage you to make sure that you're spending time with that. It's never, you can't be too busy. You just can't be too busy. So I mean, one of the things that I've been doing in just this last 3 weeks, so I'm coming up on the end, I felt God really challenged me to help start identifying core books for me in the New Testament specifically. I've been reading a different book of the New Testament every day. And so it takes 27 days to do that. Granted, I mean, you can clump some of the epistles, read 4 or 5 of those in a day because they're short. But I'm going through reading, not study Bible. I take it with me everywhere I'm at. I've got my my NIV Note Taker's Bible because it's a nice wide margin. So if I want to write something in it, highlight it, underline it, and I was really encouraged. One of the things that Clinton talks about in his being a biblically centered leader, which I really appreciate, he'd buy a new Bible every year and start over without any notes and just rework it and go through it. And so he's got a stack of Bibles at home that he's worked through in the last 30 years. That I would encourage you to do the same thing and to start reading the Bible, like I said, devotionally, and reading it, letting God speak to you through it, and developing that from there. Clinton has got he's written commentaries just based upon what God is saying to him through those texts, as opposed to just always relying on somebody else's thoughts. Because I don't know, have you guys ever read a commentary and you go, man, that is not what I got from that verse? You understand that that's probably contextually correct and it's probably historically accurate and the hermeneutic is, you're sure it's great. But have you ever read it and gone, wow, that wasn't at all what God was saying to me? That's great. That's great. Because understand, God still speaks through his word. It's a living word. So let me encourage you, let me challenge you to reevaluate your current relationship with God's word, your current relationship with reading and studying, and you can do what Andrea did, and when you're bored, whip out the test and answer a few questions, and go from there. But I would encourage you to do so. You can pray for my friend that's taking it for his credential transfer. 75% on those first 300 questions. Yeah, that's going to be...
Do you have any idea what kind of questions they are?
They're those first 300 questions.
Oh,
that Biblical Master Proficiency Instrument. It's the first 300 questions on that. Plus, he said, plus essays. And so the essays are beyond that. But, I mean, just getting 75% on those 300 questions, that's a bear. Bless you. Bless you. All right, you're on your own now. Okay.
Thank you.
All right. So I just wanted to say that again because as we're talking about our core leadership beliefs, that's our first one right there, which I want us to continue to emphasize. The heart of the leader directly impacts his or her ability to lead. Honestly, I think, like I said, we could spend the entire class talking about that. Leader's foundation, we spend more time talking about the leader's development and the heart of the leader, the internal qualities and such. I'm just constantly reworking these classes to try and get them into the right shape of what I want. And I think eventually I'm just going to start over. So and get there. So the heart of the heart of the leader sets the tone for the organization. Again, paranoid people, they produce paranoid followers, and so it makes a big difference. If you've ever worked for somebody that's angry, eventually you get a bunch of grumpy people. If you've ever worked for somebody that's happy, like I think working for over in the CDC with Lila would be great, because Lila she's so encouraging and easygoing. She'd probably be a great boss, I think. The teachers seem to like her. So the organizational culture directly impacts the way people experience the organization. So we use the example of Chick-fil-A. Chick-fil-A has a customer service orientation, right? So you go there, you say, thank you. What is their response? My pleasure. They want to do that, as opposed to some places that it seems like you can go and eat there as long as you can put up with the staff. I'm trying to think of some. I'm not so around here. I don't have any real good examples. In Ohio, I think I use the example of Marion's Pizza. It's a place that if you can put up with the staff and if you can endure, you can eat there. They don't take debit cards. They don't take checks. It's cash only. They don't give refills. They won't let you move tables if you've got large parties. They don't bring the food to you. They give you cheap plastic paper knives and cheap plastic paper plates and stuff. It's the kind of place that it's great pizza, but if you can put up with the staff there, you'll eat there. But they have a much different culture. You go there knowing that you're going to be served poorly, and so that's their culture, and they're okay with it. So they're not wasting money on trying to please customers, but they seem to be doing okay. They still got 7 places in Dayton that are open. So, and then that last one. The way people experience the organization directly impacts the organization's ability to fulfill its mission. This is review, but ultimately this matters because in organization, your goal is to fulfill the mission, whatever that mission is. And in church, obviously our mission is to grow the kingdom of God. And if people come to church and they do not enjoy the experience or they cannot connect with that church, what's going to happen? They're going to leave, and they might go to another church, and then again, they might not. And that's one of the challenges that we face in a lot of churches is that some have become so specialized in what they do, they have narrowed their band of engagement, and then others try and be so broad in what they do that they've watered everything down. So it's finding that right balance in focus and mission, but ultimately the organizational culture, and we'll talk about organizational culture more in another class. This class actually has some preludes to that conversation. But organizational culture will impact those that come, and it will ultimately dictate the type of people that you maintain, the type of people that join, the type of people that as you move into leadership, that's the question that you have to ask. What kind of followers do you want? And then answer the question of what kind of leader do I need to be to get those kind of followers? And if you're not willing to do that work, then you're probably really not interested in having those followers. It's that people that want to change versus people that want to change. The ones that want to change, they don't actually want to change. They just wish that they would. And they keep on waking up every morning and saying, man, it'd be easier if I just get up and, read my Bible or just get up and go to the gym or whatever. They want to change, but they really don't actually want to change, if that makes sense. They want to. It's the ones that they look at and you go, I wish that was important to me, and it's just not. There's certain things that it just doesn't matter to me. And as a leader, a lot of times people talk about wanting to be different, but they're not willing to do the difficult work to change who they are to lead differently. So those are things that we talk about in leadership. We talk about that more in Leaders Foundation. But understand the impact of that on your success in ministry and as a leader comes to this point here. The way people experience the organization directly impacts the organization's ability to fulfill its mission. And that all builds on heart, tone, experience, organizational culture, all that builds towards that point. So, and we talked about that in the context of redemptive leadership. We're not gonna run through the redemptive model here. We're just gonna run through some quick slides that we have here. Competency, principles, characters. Remembering that the first two, competency and principles, are external factors. Those are external things that you can learn, skills and abilities. Competency is basically having the skills to do something. Principles, understanding why something is important. And then those last three are the character, transformation, and redemption. Those are internal things to you as a leader. So if we think about it in this context of an organization, think of it as a railroad track, okay? So we've got, railroad, so you got it here, right? You've got your internal and your external. I missed that end. That's why I hate writing on whiteboards. You've got your internal and external qualities that run parallel to each other. And so in the development of the redemptive leadership model, these are the three elements, or two elements, the internal, external. So this is character and competency. I'm sorry, internal are the character, transformation, and redemption. The external, are the competency and principles. They run parallel in your development as a leader, okay? So keep that in mind, that they have to coincide with each other. You can develop skills and abilities and fail in the character, transformation, and redemptive elements, and you won't necessarily grow as a leader because you can't run a railroad on one track, can you? You need the parallel tracks. So on the character side of things, you guys all did great because none of you lied about doing the doing the test. So that's good. That's good. I'm proud of you. I was curious if anyone was gonna. I kind of expected everyone to come back and say, "Yeah, we did it," and just bloody diplomas. So, but understand this is part of the development of a leader. We've already talked about it. So this next few minutes, what I want to do is talk about leading from vision, which we covered in that video, right? You recall that from a couple weeks ago, and so we'll shoot through it pretty quick, and then we'll take a break. But I want to go through it so that if there's any questions, so that we have good clarity in it, okay? Because we covered a lot in that the video was only like an hour, and we went through it pretty quick. And so there's probably a couple of things that I want to expand on and stretch through there and cover a little bit fuller. So any questions at this point? You guys, are you guys doing okay? Okay. All right.
Great.
All right. Some of us look a little tired. Yeah. Griffin, you look wide awake, ready to go. You look a little wired. So in a good way. Yeah. 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 So all right. So vision, and this is part of the modeling the way aspect for Kuzma and Posner, and inspiring a shared vision was one of the conversations that we wanted to have. And then the next week, what I want to talk about, and we'll talk about it a little bit tonight, is that element of challenge the process. How are you guys doing in your reading for Kuzma and Posner? Are you guys reading it?
Working on it.
Okay. Okay. You're not reading it? You're not reading it? Okay.
I'm reading it from right to
Yeah.
left.
You're reading it from right to left? Okay. It's a big book. Okay. Thank you, Brian. Thank you. So at this point, I think in our reading, we should be through, Taylor, open it up to the table of contents and look at challenge the process.
There's 4.
Hmm?
That's 4.
That's section 4?
Or section 4.
Section 4, okay.
Chapter 7, 3.
Chapter 7 through. I think that's about where we're at in our reading. Chris can look at the syllabus specifically to tell you. Ultimately, the thing that's important is to make sure you're done.
You should be at page 161.
Page 161, okay.
Oh, actually, wait a minute, my bad. We should be at 221.
221, okay.
Oh, that's section 5.
Section 5, okay. All right, so here's the reason I break down the reading for you like this, is because as the end of the semester approaches, everything's going to start piling on. And so let me encourage you, and the page numbers might be a little different for you, Brian, in that because mine's on the 4th edition. So, but as it piles on, you start wondering, oh, how am I going to get this done? How am I going to get this done? And so let me encourage you to stay on top of it. So leading from vision, this deals really with, in the chapter 4 of inspire to share vision, and then part of the challenge, the process. I want to make sure that we get it covered here. Vision, let's define vision. A picture of the preferable future. It's a picture that creates passion. Our expectations of a better tomorrow. There's a great book out there called Taking People With You. It was written by, I think his last name's Novak. He is the president of Yum brand. And it's a horrible name for a company. But Yum is KFC and Taco Bell and a couple other, Pizza Hut. Yeah, I think you're Pizza Hut, right? Because they used to be part of Pepsi. And then Pepsi sold them to themselves. And then they became their own company, spun them off. And he talks about the power of sharing vision to get other people to come with you. And one of his whole points is that if you're not energetic, excited about what could happen, where you are going or what you could be, why would you anticipate followers to have that excitement? So that's where it says a picture of the preferred future. Oftentimes you'll hear a leader talk about what they want to see happen, or they talk about it like it's already happened, or they talk about it like it's about to happen, and it hasn't gotten there yet. But what they're doing is they're casting vision, and they talk about where they're wanting to go, not necessarily where they actually are. It's so easy to diagnose where an organization is. That's not hard. To be able to point out flaws and where things aren't going well and failure, that's easy. That's easy to do. But to be able to paint a picture for other people, that's hard. And he talks about just the different vision statements and mission statements of organizations. It's a great book. But one of the things that he emphasizes in there is having a vision that connects with people emotionally and lets them understand what you're about as an organization. So like Starbucks' vision is to transform the world one store, one neighborhood, one cup of coffee at a time. And they've got it's a little bit wordier than that, but it's that they've got this belief as an organization that they as a company can provide transformation through coffee. And if you've seen some early morning people that aren't really early morning people, they might be right. But if we don't have vision and excitement and energy, what happens is that there's no reason for people to follow you in what you're doing. So if you're not excited about what you're doing, why would you expect anyone else to be excited? And so as we talk about that, keep that in mind. Vision becomes the catalyst. And oftentimes vision becomes the driver before there's any momentum. Because we can have great vision, and oftentimes that vision hasn't come to fruition yet. So what that means is that we need to get it out there and then start doing it so we see things start happening. Because vision is great. You guys remember the video of the lone dancing guy on the hill? Right? Right? He didn't have any vision about that. But what happened to that? What happened once people started grabbing it? It was the momentum. So you had the first guy out there dancing, saying this is, obviously he wasn't trying to start a movement, right? So let's not take the analogy too far. But it does play out in the fact that he was out there doing something by himself. And then as momentum built, more and more people wanted to be behind it. And so the benefit of vision is that it gets the ball rolling. It gets people moving in the right direction. And then once that momentum has been gained and that momentum has been reached, then we start seeing the organizations grow even further into that vision. So benefits of vision, like I said, since this is, review, we don't have to spend a ton of time right here. Benefits of vision: it clarifies direction, increases energy, facilitates change, aligns resources, defines focus, and enables leadership succession. That would be an interesting conversation to have because most churches don't do leadership succession well. I visited a church in California when I was out there in my class, and it just broke my heart. The senior pastor of 33 years retired 13 years ago. And when he retired, the church was running 1,200, and now they're running like 400. And there's been 2 other pastors since that time, and he is back as the interim pastor 13 years after he retired. And he's a great guy, but imagine if he had raised up somebody to take that church that would have been able to continue the momentum and growth that they had. We don't do leadership succession well here in the United States. I don't think we do it well in churches in general, because too much of it's about a personality cult and serve me, not serve others. So I think too many people, they cling to that too tight. So corporate entities do much better at leadership succession than we do as a church, because oftentimes when you get a new pastor, what's that mean? You hit the reset button. Let's get a new vision. And I don't think that's how God works. I think God has called each church. God has a specific ministry. Don't get me wrong. Don't read that more into say each church should only be doing one thing. But God has gifted a local congregation with his heart. And in that context, lead pastors and staff pastors need to take into account, how has God used this church traditionally? How has God, just like we were talking about what books of the Bible has spoken to you, that's your core. What are core values of that local congregation? When we start taking those things into account, you don't have to hit the reset button every time you get a new senior pastor. You can continue to build and grow on that, continue to improve it and refine it. And I think that's really more of God's heart than resetting everything every time somebody new comes in. But in order to do that, you have to have a clarified vision of what God's called you to do and what God's called that local congregation to do. A couple of great resources. Aubrey Malfer's Advanced Strategic Plan is a great book talking about incorporating the local church into the conversation of vision. Because too often, vision casting by a lead pastor or by a board or by whoever, it's done with a Lone Ranger kind of feel. They've been Moses, they've gone to the hill, and this is what they've walked back with. So understanding that, it helps us to enable the vision to continue on. And why is that so important? Is because that helps to contribute to the longevity of an organization and a church. The ability to continue on in the vision that God has given the church helps it to have longevity, and it helps it to avoid dying. I mean, if you're resetting every 5 to 7 years, because I don't know what the average stay for a lead pastor is, but it's not long, 5 to 7 years. Hearing that pastors that are at churches 10 to 15 years is getting very, very uncommon. I mean, the church I was talking about in San Diego, the lead pastor retiring after 33 years, man, that's getting unheard of anymore, that guys are staying that long, because it's stepping stones into a bigger opportunity. But and I'm not, moving on is not always bad, understand that, but we're not seeing vision prolonged. We're seeing churches reset.
Thomas Rainer says 3 to 4 years.
Is the average length? I believe it.
Wow.
Yeah. And that's why we're seeing, and that's, I think that's why we're seeing more and more churches that slide into decline, is because more and more guys are saying, man, somebody screwed this thing up so bad, I don't want to be the one to fix it. And I'm sorry, I'm very dry tonight. It's a hard place to be. And so imagine if somebody came with the mindset, I'm going to stay there for 10 years. I'm going to stay there. I think I shared a couple years ago, we had Brian Jarrett come in, and Brian was pastoring at in a church in Oklahoma, and it was a very country church, and he's not a country guy, even though he's got a heart for planting churches in rural communities. He's not country. He's in Dallas, but I hope you understand what I'm saying when I say country. And so he had all of these things in mind that he was going to do to change this church. And it was kind of like a last-ditch effort of, I'm going to do this, and then if it doesn't work, I'm gone. And he just felt God tell him just real clearly, if you're not willing to stay to see this happen, then don't even start it. And so he went someplace else. And when he left that church, they had a pastor that came in that fit their heart, fit the vision of the church, and they flourished. And he went someplace else, and he was flourished. But imagine if they find that place, and instead of just saying, hey, I'm going to be here as long as, until I get another opportunity. And they take that place of saying, hey, I'm going to be here until God moves me on, until I've done everything that he's called me to do here. and look at it with a longer lens instead of 3 to 4 years. Man, 3 to 4 years, you can't affect anything. 3 to 4 years, you can run out like the bad people. And what you end up with is a remnant. They'll tell you in any leadership change that it's 5 to 7 years to create a new culture. 5 to 7. So if you're leaving at 3 to 4 years, all you're doing is disrupting the existing culture and not instituting anything new. So is it any surprise when you hear that there's so many churches that are in decline? Yeah. And that's the challenge. And these are the hard questions. I think this is the kind of questions that you're hearing younger ministers ask as we start talking about longevity in ministry and we start talking about the decline of Christian churches, is the rise of the professional pastor. That rise of that professional pastor, the professional minister. In some ways, it's hurt the church. Yeah. And obviously, other ways, the expansion of the gospel has happened in many ways, but the decline of the local church has happened in a lot of ways too. So, yeah.
This is kind of like out of the blue, but it has to do with just culture and stuff. What would you say, thinking about just the cultural like changes and just longevity for a group in the terms of youth?
Say that again.
What would you say in parallel? The church has 5 to 7 years to create a new culture and a new vision. What would you say in comparison to youth in that time frame?
Like how long does it take to create a new culture in a youth group?
Yeah.
I don't know if I could give you specific in youth ministry. I think you're probably looking at something similar. I mean, you're gonna honestly, that's where a trickle down is going to impact things. Youth, they'll change quicker than adults, but your youth culture still needs to reflect the church culture. So there's going to be elements of turning with that. If you can't, and this is youth, children's, young adults, it doesn't matter. That the local departmental ministry, they have to reflect the vision and mission of the church. So there's going to be elements that youth might adapt to things quicker, but they also might not get ingrained as deeply. So I don't know. I don't know if there's anybody's done any studies on that, but I do know this, that the average youth pastor is at like 18 months, and that might actually be long anymore. Actually, I think 18 months was about 5 years ago. They might be down to 12. And that's youth and children's ministry. Children's ministry used to have a longevity in ministry different than youth, but anymore I know children's ministry is under 24 months for change. So yeah, I don't know. I think in some ways it can be quicker, but one of the challenges, and one of the challenges in both church organizations and departmental ministries is this. We're going this way. Nope, we're going to go this way. Nope, this way. Nope, that. And what people aren't giving time for things to happen, they're not giving time for change to anchor into the culture. And so how long it takes for something to get anchored into culture depends upon how significant it is. I mean, if it's a matter of something as simple as we want people to pass the offering plates from left to right instead of right to left, yeah, that's not going to really mess that many people up. But if we say we're going to do away with offering plates entirely, we're going to just put offering boxes in the back, that's a significant cultural change, isn't it? Or let's say we're going to change how we light on Sunday mornings. We decided we're going to put the lights at 20% brightness. That's going to take a longer time for the church, for an older church to adjust to. Youth, hey, turn out the lights. They don't care. I still don't like worshiping in the dark, but that's just me. It depends upon, and we'll talk about that in change, the kinds of change, the difference between a technical change and adaptive change and a cultural change. I don't know if I've answered your question. I think I've danced around it a little bit, but because I don't think there's a definitive answer.
Well, you kind of did it. It was longevity.
Yeah, it'll take 1 to 3 years just to take a group of students to get them
To like you.
Get them to where they actually trust what you're doing.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know,
teenagers aren't just going to, they've been through enough stuff, they're just not going to give their heart away to anybody.
Yeah.
And so, but it's going to take a solid year of you doing everything that you can just to have a percentage of them starting to go with you. And it's usually, for many of them, it's 2 to 3 years. And some of them, believe it or not, you'll never, they won't let you crack them because of the amount of hurt that they've endured
Sure.
before you arrive. It's nothing personal against you. You can't take it personal. That's why you just keep reaching out, no matter what. Even if they're cold, even if they're hard, even if they act like you're not even in the room, you always go the extra mile in hopes for that day that they will. And then when they see you in 10 years after that, and they never really gave you the time, they'll say, "Well, I remember one thing you did say, and it helped me."
Sure.
Like, awesome.
Yeah. Chris?
To answer your question, because I've had experience, working at the adolescence program of Teen Challenge, and just when a new student would come in and give them it take months to to pretty much settle in to being able to trust you and trust that that you're there to love them and to to help them to better themselves. Last night, I got to talk to somebody that I mentored, as a student when they went through Teen Challenge, and he came up to me last night and said, "Thank you for pouring your whole heart into my life." And he had to go through restoration because he kind of slipped up and he went out to Colorado Teen Challenge. And last night, he had a better heart and just a better mentality of what the Christian walk is. It does take time for youth to be able to get used to this walk. And I've seen teens walk out of Teen Challenge right back out on the streets.
Sure.
Pretty much doing it all over again.
Yeah.
And it does take time, it does take change. And and after speaking with them, God has just have amazing plans in store for this young man.
Yeah. And so it just speaks even greater to the advantage and the necessity of longevity.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to what you said about the rise of the professional pastor.
Yeah, the rise of the professional pastor.
Could you expound on that just a little
Sure. Why you want me to expound as to what that is or why it's a problem? Okay, so the rise of the professional pastor, those that ministry is a job. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm all. I mean, and Paul even said, if you preach the gospel, that being paid for that is appropriate. That's not the issue. The issue is the professional clergy that have made. I am not a worship pastor, okay, but I've been in church long enough that I could program a worship service, and I could plan a Sunday morning service to get the response that I want. I've done this long enough. I've been in church long enough. I know how to preach the message. I know how to ask people to. I could get the altar full every time. I know how to do it, and there are those that do it as a matter of professional programming, not as a matter of this is what God's doing right now. Now, obviously, there's a way to communicate things and that you are generating response, but it's the challenge of the professional clergy. It started. I mean, it's way before modern era. I mean, the challenge of it is that it takes the burden for ownership of your personal faith away from you, and it places it on the church. It takes the burden. It's like the Sunday school movement of the 1700s literally told parents, you aren't qualified to teach your children about Jesus, so give them to us and we will. And what did that produce? It produced spiritually shallow parents. And so the current movement in children's and youth ministry is this partnering with parents. And it's been happening for about the last 20 years where you see this pendulum shifting, going, how can we help parents be the spiritual head of their house? And it's the same thing in church. Professional clergy, the professional pastor, they get to this point where it's just a matter of their job. It's not a matter, and it's not that they weren't called, but they have moved to the point where this. I was talking to a friend of mine in California when I was out there. He's a worship leader, and he just flat out said it. He goes, "Yeah, I can write a service that's going to get people to think God's presence is there, but in reality, he goes, it's got nothing to do with God's presence. It's how I've done the songs. It's how and it's when we get to that point that it challenges the continuation of ministry." And so I'm obviously I'm in favor of paid ministers. I make a living doing what I'm doing, but there has to be a vibrancy and a personal relationship with Jesus, and it's so easy for things. This is the interesting phenomenon that I've seen in ministry that I just never understand. When people are willing to jump from church to church to church, regardless of the denomination. So the friends of mine that go from Assemblies of God to I've got friends of mine. We're Pentecostal, right? And I have friends that have left and gone to be children's pastors at Baptist churches. It's not that there's anything wrong with Baptists, but theologically, we're not the same as far as our belief of the Holy Spirit and the function there. And I asked him, I said, well, what do you do about Pentecost? We just don't talk about it. All right, dude. He goes, but they offered me a lot more money than what I was making here, and so I'm going for it. Yeah, and so their evaluation, again, I'm not bad-mouthing Baptists by any stretch of the imagination. I'm not, but there's a significant theological difference between Pentecostals and Baptists, and I've never understood those that can jump beyond through the different theological hoops and just say, well, I had a youth pastor that I grew up with. No, I grew up under. He was my youth pastor. He acknowledged. He goes, "Nah, I don't really believe in speaking in tongues. I just signed the paper." Dude, what are you doing here? There's plenty of other denominations that don't teach what these. Go over there. But it was. He goes. Honestly, he just flat out said, the job pays good. It's in the area of the country I want to live in. It's close to family. Is where we go. So that's when it's become a professional thought. I've always had to take the philosophy of if I had my preference, I'd live in Ohio, 30 minutes from my family, maybe 45 minutes away from my family. I love my family. I just want to be just far enough away where I can't just pop over. But
is it you popping over or them popping in?
Them popping over, yeah. Actually, so when I lived in San Diego, it was perfect because Heather and I lived before they moved to Branson. We lived an hour and 10 minutes away from her parents. It was perfect because when they would plan stuff on Sunday afternoons, we're like, "Oh, I'm sorry, we can't cut up. We can't come because we don't get out of church till 1, and we got to be back by 5. So it just doesn't work. I'm sorry." So yeah, there's a perfect distance. Yeah, when you're like a half an hour or less, they're right there all the time. But if I had my preference, that's what I do. But and there's nothing wrong with those things. Don't get me wrong. And God oftentimes does orchestrate that stuff. But when that's your only deciding factor, and it's more about finding an open church that's in where you want, as opposed to what God wants for you. That's the challenge. That's a challenge. So, does that answer your question? All right. So let's shoot through here before we're on slide 7 of 44. And it's just so you know. Like I said, we're not going to get through it all tonight. Because we're going to take a break here in just about 4 minutes. So the process of vision, we talk about authoritarian decree, micromanagement, compelling vision. This is all in how you share vision. We'll talk more about that. Let's not spend any time on here. We'll talk about that more when we talk about communicating change. But John Cotter will tell you in talking about change and vision is that we under communicate vision by a factor of 10. We get tired of it, so we don't talk about it often, but we assume everyone knows what it is. But the authoritarian decree, that's the Moses standing on the hill. Thus saith the Lord. The micromanaged vision, it's when you're basically trying to make sure everyone's doing every little detail as to how you've shared it, not necessarily with an ingrained part. And then the compelling vision, that's where you've got that emotional and spiritual connection that says it's the picture of the preferred future. This is what we're doing. So we talked about this, so I'm not going to do that. On the compelled vision, leadership creates vision and strategy management. We talked about that. Communicating vision is so very, very important. Here we go. Communicating vision, embody it. Communicate it early and often. Communicate it big and small. communicated all available means. Here's the point in vision, as we're talking about leading from vision, is that vision must be in who you are. And so as we reinforce that conversation we're having about longevity in ministry, and we reinforce that conversation we're having about just being someplace. Understand, if you're there for a short period of time, if you're not invested in a place, you're not going to have any opportunity for that vision to take heart in the church. If it takes 5 to 7 years to change a culture, you're not going to have time. 3 years in, guess what? You're still on the honeymoon. You're still on the honeymoon. People aren't invested in what you're doing, what you're saying. So embody it early and often, big and small, all available means. So we can't take for granted communicating. Honestly, I think if you're going to make your church vision-centered, it needs to be talked about every Sunday from your pulpit. It has to be more than just fancy words on a wall. A lot of churches did that during the purpose-driven movement. They all had these great big vision statements. Those are great, but it has to be embodied, and especially with the millennial generation and the postmoderns, they want authentic leadership. And they want a leader that does what he says, more so the one that just says stuff. Saying stuff is great. I was talking about this last Wednesday night in my class. I'm teaching on James on Wednesday nights. How do you know what someone believes? That's the question. How do you know what someone believes? You've been in my class before. It's by what they do. It's by what they do. It's not by what they say. It's not even by what they teach. It's by what they do. And so that's what vision, when we talk about embodying it, that's what it means. You could talk about vision saying we want to be the first ones to reach our hand across every divide. But if you're not willing to do that, then it's just words. It's just words. So leading from vision is so very important when we're understanding the context of our role as a leader. And we'll talk about this in the context of organizational culture. But as a leader, you are the chief cultural architect, which means that you have to help shape what happens in your organization, in the ministry that you lead. Whether it's a youth ministry, whether it's a full church, or whether it's just a small group, you shape that. And vision is foundation to all of that. It's foundational to all of that. So, any questions? Okay, so let's do this. It's 7:01. Our next session is talking about philosophy of ministry, which builds off of vision. So let's take a 15. Let's take a 20. All right, I think everybody's so come back at 7:20. All right. Sometimes it's like you guys don't realize that other people can see you. You know?
You don't really care.
Okay. Am I a poet? No.
It tastes
You
so
look like you would be a
good.
poet.
I look like a poet? I'm not sure you know what a poet looks like if you think I look like one. Oh.
I can't take it. That's so good.
You don't like Twizzler? I don't either.
So good. It's like
Yeah.
bubblegum.
You don't like bubblegum?
No, it's like bubblegum. Yeah, I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't care for I don't like the consistency of Twizzlers.
Ew, what tastes good.
Just right now.
All right, well, Anidra, who's watching on the video, has got to be wondering what my facial expressions are over. So why don't we go ahead and get started here. Any last comments about leading from vision or what we talked about in that last session there? Any comments, questions, concerns, complaints? So complaints, just file them in the trash can. So, let me ask you this. How many of you have turned your paper in via Advanced 360? Cool.
I went back to the house.
You went back to the house and did it?
I could right now, but I'm still proofing it.
That's-
We're going through class.
As we go through your proofing, yeah. Okay, that's fine. It's 11:59. I meant to have your the paper that you turned in February. I got all your reading reports. I posted all the grades for those. I meant to have your paper for the developmental timeline on Clinton. that you guys did in early February. I meant to have that graded by tonight. I'll have it graded tomorrow. I've got a meeting on Wednesday in Washington, D.C., so I'm just heading up tomorrow morning to making a day of it and grading papers. I'll be honest with you, I hate grading papers. I really, really do. So here, if you feel bad about the amount of work that you have in this class, so you guys, I've told you, I'm teaching in Tanzania, right? So I got clarification on the work, because I don't do the assignments, but I get to dictate what's taught in the class. But then they've got books that I've got to use and all that stuff. And so here's the assignments. They've got a 6 to 8 page paper.
Wow.
That's due, and it talks about their ministry context, their history, their development, their understanding of leadership models. Then there's 6 to 8. Then there's a 4 to 6 page paper talking about contextual issues. Then there's another 4 to 6 page paper, and then there's another 4 to 6 page paper, and an 18 to 25 page paper. But here's
Is the paper smaller?
no, and they have to do it. It's all now. Understand, these are all people that English is not their first language.
Wow.
It all has to be in Turabian formatting, and it all has to be done in the 7 days that I'm teaching class.
What?
And I have to grade it all.
What the heck?
Yeah.
What?
So they've got 7 days to write between the 5 papers. It's by the time they're done, it's 36 to 45 pages in 7 days. And so the class schedule is I'm teaching from it's 8 to 10, then with 10 to 10:30 is tea, and then 10:30 to 1. That's the rest of the class. And so I teach that Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday. So that's the class I'm teaching. But they've got to do so. Basically, the first day on Monday, we're going to spend about a half an hour going over this is what the class is, and then we're going to dive right into it. And their first paper, I start teaching on a Wednesday. Their first paper will be due Thursday morning. So, because I want them to have their second paper due by Friday afternoon. So, I mean, otherwise they're gonna. I mean, it's crazy. And so I asked the missionary that was working with the Bible college. I'm like, okay, are you seriously telling me that they have to? And he's like, yep. And I'm like, and then you're telling me I've got to grade all of that. So, and I don't know how many students I've got. It's somewhere between 10 and 15.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Are these students like advanced or something?
It's a master's level class.
Okay.
It's a master's class, but still, I mean that's
gonna be
a lot of work. I
Do
mean,
they know they want to do that?
what's
Are
that?
there wiping kids around?
I would imagine they're doing the intensives the same way, the same way I did my master's, which was I was out of town for a week. But see, in my master's, every class had a 30-page paper, and we had way more reading than they have for their class. But so they've got more writing than I had for mine.
I've heard that the devil's in the details.
But I'm telling you what, man, it's
30 pages.
yeah, it's a lot of
Yeah.
it's a lot of. I mean, I just can't imagine they're gonna. I mean, they have to write. They have, and then there's a service learning project that they have to develop and do. It's only like a 2-page paper on that thing, but they've got to have actual application. I don't know how in the world they're going to. I mean, that's a lot of stuff to do. So they have to. They're going to have that last paper into me by Wednesday. So literally a week after we start. So they'll have to actually. So I'll make that due by midnight Wednesday night, and I'll grade that Thursday after class, and then
You cannot grade 15 students 30-page papers in whatever hours you have left, unless you're putting everything through Grammarly.
Right.
Just sticking
well,
them
and see, so now here's how you do that on the grading, is that it's all in the rubric you develop. So since English isn't their first language, grammar is going to count for about like 10% of the grade, right? And I'm not going through to teach them English, and so. And honestly, my experience with African students is that they put more effort into the rest of you guys. Yeah, I'm sorry, but they it has so it'll be interesting. Yeah, I mean that's a lot of grading. And so that's why your papers take forever for me to grade because I hate grading. But I'll have nothing else. I'm preaching like 2 times while I'm over there, and then we're going to a safari park for a couple of days.
Safari,
But,
elephants,
yeah.
giraffes.
So it'll be interesting.
No.
So they've got. No, I'm sorry, I can't put you in my suitcase.
Oh,
So yeah,
you
it'll be interesting to. I wanted to. I was thinking, okay, if they have to write the short papers while I'm there, and then I can grade the longer papers when I get back. Nope, everything there. So what you grade in then is on content, and that's one of the things I've tried to do here is I try not to make. I try not to make grammar more than 10% of any grade, and then I try and grade on content. And so, I mean, if you get a 70 or something on one of my papers, it's either because the paper wasn't long enough, or you just didn't make any sense. So I'm not saying that anybody that, but if you get a lower grade for my papers, I try and grade for content, unless your formatting is just absolutely atrocious. I've had a couple of papers that I've graded that I've written, if you turn them in electronically, I'll do the track changes with you. And I've literally just put a spot which said, I've quit making grammatical corrections on like the third page. And there's like 5 pages. I mean, I just, from here on out, just understand it's bad. And so in those papers, they get like, I've had some papers turned in, they're using English words, but they're not using the English language. Because the commas and periods and sentence structure, it's like Yoda typed it. So,
Whoa.
yeah, you think I'm kidding? You think I'm kidding? I mean, there have been some papers that were so atrociously bad, I have given them back and said, go sit down with Janelle, and then we will grade it again. And here's the challenge. I know. So some students want to go on to get a secondary degree. I know, like Alex and Andy have both talked about wanting to get masters, which is I think great if you want to do that. But the higher up in education you go, the more writing you have.
Oh man.
Yeah. So yeah. And so here's how I'm looking at it right now. I've got 3 papers left to do to get my doctoral degree. 3 papers. 2 of them are 30 to 40 pages. And then one of them is somewhere between 150 and 200. And then I'm done. It's called a dissertation.
Oh.
So, but then I got 3 papers left. I'm done. 3. I'm not writing papers anymore. So, all right. So if you feel bad about your assignments, feel better. You have more time. So, but make sure to get it in tonight. Make sure to get it in tonight. You've had plenty of notice on that. Yeah.
How do professors in the doctoral program grade 100 to 200 pages?
Well, they have multiple graders. So what they end up with, so you have one guy that is the technical reader. So the technical reader, all he's reading for is formatting and grammar. And then you'll have other readers that are reading for content and what you're trying to say. So you'll have 3 or 4 people graded, but it's what they're grading for. The one that takes the longest is the technical reader, and so he's going through on every aspect of periods, commas, spacing. I mean, I honestly on your papers on Turabian stuff, I could wear you out on mistakes that you make on Turabian, things that you don't even know you're doing wrong because most people just don't care. But there's so many little details in this stuff. So there's one guy that's what he does. His name's John Saunders. He lives in California. But for Bethel Seminary, that's what he does. But they have multiple people reading. And so then they have a whole core of people that are grading it. And then in addition to that, so like in my dissertation, so I'll start it next February. And the first 3 chapters are due in November. And then the rest of it is due, and there's 7 chapters total. The rest of it's due by January 15th. So there's a multiple step process so that they're not grading it all in one shot. So like Pastor Glenn in his dissertation, his first draft, he turned it in and he made so many changes. He started over on like 70, he threw like 70 pages of work out. Because it was easier to do that than to edit what he had. And he's a good writer. He's a good writer. So, but they do it, and so it's not like it's not like every doctoral student turns in all of their dissertations to one guy. Like I'm the only one grading papers in this class. Okay, in the doctoral phase, you have an advisor who's the primary grader, and then they use multiple people. So there might be 2 or 3 people that are grading like 2 students' work, and then in addition to that, then you have an oral defense that goes along with it and stuff. So, it takes a village to grade a dissertation, apparently. So there you go. All right. All right, let's talk about philosophy of ministry, which I think this is so important to understand because philosophy of ministry in the context, as we've talked about, vision, I think these go hand in hand. Philosophy of ministry is, in a lot of ways, it's the lens through which you evaluate what you do as a church. Philosophy of ministry is very important, and oftentimes I was actually reading a blog this morning. How many of you have read anything by Carey Nieuwhof? And Carey, he's what's the name of the church? He's Canadian, so every now and then he uses some funny language. But he is closely connected with Andy Stanley. He puts out a ton of blogs. He's up in, like I said, he's Canadian. It's Connects Church, I think. But he's got a lot of good stuff. But one of the things he was talking about is, actually, it wasn't even him I was reading. It was Jim White I was reading. James Emery White. I don't know if you've read. He's at Mecklenburg, whatever, in New York. But he was talking about the majority of challenges and conflict that you see in churches actually isn't methodologies. It's not theological. Most of it is philosophy of ministry, which is basically how things are done. What matters. And I can tell you from personal experience, at least 3 of the churches that I left, it was because of a philosophy of ministry difference, of how things should happen. It's not that what they were doing was wrong. It's not what they were doing was unscriptural, unbiblical, or anything. It's just that I didn't agree with how things were being done. One of them, I think the guy was immoral, but that was a whole other conversation. So, but philosophy of ministry is what causes a lot of conflict. So understand the benefits of a strong philosophy of ministry. It allows an organization to embody its deepest held theological convictions. Basically, this is what's important to us. It encourages a best ministry practices by helping leaders know who, where, how, and when to lead what. So a philosophy of ministry, it's a fuller version of vision. So vision, we talk about the vision for Bethel. We talk about the concept of dream. We demonstrate reconciliation, reshape the future, experience life, activate hope, multiply influence. Then underneath each one of those letters, Bethel has a fuller definition of demonstrate reconciliation. What does that mean? We want Bethel to be the first people to reach across any divide, whether it's racial, economic, social. We want to reshape the future. We believe a significant investment in this generation will change the shape of the future. So we talk about those things in that context, and as you flesh those out, it helps you to get a definition of what matters to the organization and what matters to you as a church. And so it is a fuller picture of vision. So that's a good thing to understand, good thing to look at. So benefits of the stronger vision, continuing on that, it helps leaders understand better their roles and goals. It helps leaders articulate the reasons held behind their ministry strategies, is essential to achieving our greatest influence for Christ in a time of accelerated change. So philosophy of ministry is another opportunity. So I used a railroad track before, right? So this time let's use a highway, okay? What do you have on both sides of a highway?
Shoulder guardrails.
You have guardrails, right?
Shoulder.
You have guardrails. You have guardrails. And the guardrails are defined by vision, and we'll call it POM. Philosophy of ministry. Philosophy of ministry. So philosophy of ministry, what does it do? It helps us to keep everything in the right lane and directed in the same direction. Directed in the same direction. That's a great English sentence, let me tell you. Yeah, those are the opportunities when you're writing papers that you can edit things when you say direction, directed in the same direction. It helps us to keep everything moving in the same direction. Is that better? Is that better? Yeah. But the guardrails, vision and philosophy of ministry, what are those? Those keep everybody in their lane. Because the reality is, and understand, guardrails don't just keep things from leaving the lanes, it keeps things from coming in too, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Because there's all sorts of people that have ideas for what you should do for your church. There's a guy around here that Bethel had we had a philosophical difference with him. Not that we disagreed with what he was doing, but he wanted us to contribute to his ministry and wanted us to make it a ministry of Bethel, and we just said, no, it's not. Well, and he wanted to argue, do you think it's not a valid ministry? Isn't this? We're not saying it's not a valid ministry. It's just not what God's called us to do. And that's the importance of vision in the philosophy of ministry, is it helps you to focus and solidify what you as a church should be doing. So it's one of those things that we understand that it provides us that guardrail. It helps leaders gain focus and establish criteria for making good decisions throughout the organization, and it creates alignment through the organization, reducing sideways energies. And that's this right here. People coming in, people coming out. A strong philosophy of ministry gives you the ability to say no. It gives you the ability to say no. So there's 5 elements to a philosophy of ministry, and we'll get away from the... I wanted to draw today. I'm sorry. There's 5 elements. There's 5 elements to a philosophy of ministry. And here they are. You guys all have them right there. So the first one is worldview. Worldview. I don't know why I circled it twice, but I did. It looks like a lizard eye at this point.
Ooh,
Yeah. Worldview. So what's it say? What's a worldview? Somebody tell me what a worldview is.
A view of the world.
There you go. View of the world. View of the... And sadly enough, he's correct. The worldview of yeah. Let's see you to find the next one. Worldview. It is the lens through which you evaluate everything. It really is. It's how you look at everything. And so you can see. So what we talk about at the beginning of this class, one of the goals is to help you create a biblical worldview, right? So that the lens that we evaluate everything is the Bible. And so it's the worldview. It's what you use to determine what's right, what's wrong, what you want to be a part of, what you don't want to be a part of. This is the worldview. Then the next thing in the philosophy of ministry, number 2, I won't circle that twice. Number 2 is the mission. Now, mission will be affected by worldview. Okay? Mission will be affected by worldview. And what is mission? Mission, yeah, go ahead. If you use the word mission in this definition.
No, something that has like a goal.
Something that is a goal. Okay, you're close. You're getting close there. Mission, yeah, Griffin. It's an objective. Okay, you're getting close.
Something that you're sent to do.
Okay, hang on to that definition for the next one. Mission. What has God called us to do? What has God called us? You remember I talked about understanding that each church has a call and a ministry and a unique character, a unique creation. Yeah. Understand that is the mission. So you hear a lot about missional churches, and Craig Van Gelder's got a great book called The Ministry of the Missional Church, and it talks about understanding that we, as a church, should understand what the current activity of God is and how we can join that. This is the mission. But our mission is going to be impacted by our worldview, isn't it? It's going to be impacted by our worldview. Let's say our worldview says that there are thousands and hundreds of thousands of people that have been rejected by society, and that my worldview says that somebody needs to reach to those people. So as a mission, you're going to start trying to find ways that you can reach out to those people. And so mission is what has God called us to do. But mission directly impacts number 3, which is aims, which is... You go back to the other one.
What did I say?
Goals. Okay. Goals. Aims. We another word for that would be goals. But that's going to come, your goals are going to come out of the mission. What does God call us to do? So these are the elements of a good worldview. And then The fourth element of looks like Charlie Brown. The fourth element is going to be core values. Now understand, your core values are affected by your worldview, your mission, and your aims. All of these tie into your core values. So, this is how I see the world. This is what God has called us to do. These are my goals. These are what is important to us. Okay? That makes sense? That makes sense? Okay. And then our fifth one. Our fifth one is strategies. And we're going to put number 5 right down here, and then we're going to draw a line. Okay? So, your strategies are going to be affected by your core values and your aims. So this is a nice little diagram we got here. This is how Kentucky is going to win the NCAA tournament. Does anybody care? Brian, you like college ball, don't you? You think they're going to win?
Yep. I think it's going to be very, very difficult for anybody else to win.
I don't care a hill of beans about college basketball, but I do like to see things done that people don't do often, and an undefeated season all the way through the tournament. That'd be cool. So, okay, so strategies. You know what strategies are?
Game plan.
It's the how. It's the what. So this is how we see the world. This is what God's called us to do. These are our goals. These are our values. Number 5 is this is how we're going to do it. So do you know why I drew this line? Because this is how a church should function in this line. So everything above this line, I'll just talk to Bethel here specifically. This is dictated by the lead pastor and the board. Okay? He sets this in conjunction with, if they do it well, they set it in conjunction with understanding the heart and mission of the church. And then once this is set, these things change very infrequently. You don't see these things change often. Mission, vision, these things shouldn't change. I mean, it's not quick. These things are long process items. And then once they're set, you know what the role of the board becomes oftentimes in this, and I think it's appropriate, is to help protect the vision and mission of the church. Help to protect the vision and mission of the church. Now, oftentimes, and this depends upon the denominational background that you're in, here as far as the Assemblies of God, the pastor does not work for the board, but nor does the board work for the pastor per se. They're both elected from the congregation, and the pastor is the chairman of the board. But oftentimes, especially in smaller churches, people think that the board's role is to keep the pastor accountable, and that's really not their role. There should be a level of mutual submission and accountability. And if you don't have that, what you end up with is a monarchy or a dictatorship or a theocracy, whichever one you want to call it, where the pastor thinks that they're infallible. But the challenge here is understanding that the board maintains these things, and then this becomes the role of the staff. Strategies. So we've got a great board here at Bethel, but none of them have ever come to me as in charge when I was the children's pastor, or even now in my role, family pastor. None of them have come to me and said, Spencer, you need to do this curriculum. Because that's not their role. The curriculum that we do, that's a strategy. The outreaches that we do, that's a strategy. Service times, sermons that Pastor Glenn preaches, these are all strategies, not philosophy of ministries. Now, if we start, how do they help keep us on task? Well, they have fiscal oversight. And so if Pastor Glenn went to him and said, guys, we need $1 million to open a basket weaving organization, they're going to say, well, that's not really consistent with our vision and mission. We really need to evaluate that. Amber, you were about to ask a question when I was talking about strategies.
Oh, you're not children's pastor anymore?
No, I'm the executive pastor of Family Life. Pastor Joel's our children's pastor.
I thought you've been a children's pastor
No, I haven't been the children's pastor here for about 3 years, so that's okay. It's all right. It's all right. I still work in children's ministry, but that's okay. So, but this is an important thing to understand, because what happens within an organization, and I don't want to get off track too much here, when this gets confused who does what, it presents a lot of conflict. It presents a lot of conflict. There's a church in Nashville that the senior pastor came 30 years ago and did some phenomenal stuff in that church, transformed the church, grew it from 100 people to over 5,000. 2 weeks ago, the board just asked him to leave, voted. Now, their structure allows the board to vote out the pastor. And, I didn't put those up there. They allows them to vote out the pastor. And when they do so, he didn't have to be voted on by the congregation. And so they asked him to leave. And it has created this huge conflict in the church. 5,000 people. 5,000 people. And in a week, they lost 3,000 people.
Wow.
Because the pastor basically said, I don't want to go anywhere. So he got up on a Sunday morning and read a letter to the congregation and took a vote of confidence on a Sunday morning service. And 90% of the church said, we don't want you to leave. But the board had already voted. So he posted a letter, and what happened? People got roles mixed up, and it got ugly. It got ugly. It depends on the denomination. I had a friend whose brother was a Presbyterian pastor. And the Presbyterians, everything's run by the presbytery, which is the voting body. So it's the local congregation voting, right? And so they would vote on how long the service should be, what kind of songs they should sing. They couldn't, cleaning out the closets in the church took forever because they would vote on stuff. Oh, could you imagine being in that environment? That'd be insane. But they would, this is the thing that's so hard for me to understand, they would dismiss the pastor from meetings to vote on stuff. Could you imagine that? So these are the 5 elements of a philosophy of ministry. As we put these together, it helps us to create this picture of how we function as a church. Now, strategies is below that line. Strategies will change more frequently than vision and mission. If something's not working to fulfill the vision and mission, try something new. Or let's say something is working, but it's not working as well as it could. Try something new. Strategies change. Philosophy of ministry, our vision, mission, all that doesn't change frequently. So I already actually shot through these and talking about them. Man, what in the world have I put in this PowerPoint? We're on slide 17 of 44. And I've talked for almost 2 hours now. What in the world is in this thing?
There's 15 pages.
I know, there's a lot of stuff in there. I don't know what I was thinking. I must have been rushing. Okay, all right. So we're not going to go back all through this here. Yeah. Well, it depends on where you're at in the hall. So, yeah. So, yeah. I just got to Amber. So, yeah. So, worldview, we already talked about that. Aims, you can read through that. I've already shot through it. But here's why this is important to understand in the context of conversations about vision. Because this is going to flow out of vision. This is going to flow out of vision as we talk about it. It's going to build off of what God has called you to as a church. It's going to build into how you function, how you move, how things happen. And this is so important to get right. This is so important to get right because these things will dictate long-term success. They will dictate long-term success. But this is, can I just be honest with you? This is boring sometimes. This is hard work. This is sitting in a room full of people and going, all right, let's come up with the core values of us as a church. And we say, okay, one of our core values is people. That sounds great, doesn't it? But what does that mean? So then you're doing this kind of stuff. You're doing like mind mapping. God loves them, you do it. And oftentimes, success in ministry looks an awful lot like hard work. And it's not always fun, is it? But this is the stuff that people want to skip over, they're creating a strong philosophy of ministry, they want to skip over the hard stuff to get to the fun stuff. What's the fun stuff of ministry? What's the fun stuff? I mean, there is fun stuff in ministry, right?
Always.
Yeah, what is it? Huh?
Youth convention.
Youth convention, that's fun, okay. Preaching, that's fun.
Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you've ever had the opportunity to preach to a couple thousand people.
People
It's
get
fun.
saved.
Seeing people get saved, that's fun. Hey,
Healed.
how about going out on Kids on the Go and
Oh,
getting
yes.
a chance? Yeah, there's all sorts of, there's fun stuff in ministry. You
Yeah.
should enjoy ministry. You should enjoy ministry. But this stuff, the philosophy of ministry stuff, is not the fun stuff. It's not the fun stuff. It's the important stuff. It's the foundational stuff. It's the stuff that requires the most work in the long run. Because you have to talk through the deep stuff of commitments and direction. And here is the hardest thing for a lot of people. I'm going to say this, and you guys can do with it whatever you want. A lot of pastors don't like to define vision and mission because once you write it down, then you have to do it. It gives you freedom if you don't. Well, you know, we're going to do this for a while, and then this is. But they don't ever want to sit down and have that conversation. They don't ever want to define what's important to them as an organization because they want to have that flexibility to do what they want to do at that moment in time. And if you talk to some of the, I've talked to a number of pastors that pastor large churches. There is such a clarity of definition of what matters to them that they can dismiss things that come on their radar without ever thinking about going, it doesn't fit where God's taken us. Is it because it's a bad thing? No. It just doesn't fit where God. So, like, the lead pastor of James River Assembly in
Springfield.
it's Ozark, yeah, in Ozark, Missouri, just south of Springfield. He approves every piece of graphic that goes out. Now, he might be a micromanager and a control freak, but he has such a clear vision of what they're doing as a church that it's just like what happens and doesn't happen as a church is clearly defined in their roles, in their philosophy of ministry, how they focus, what they do. And they've done some, I mean, they've grown to a church of 10,000 people in Ozark, Missouri. It's not a huge area. It's one of those things, yeah. And it's not necessarily the most attractive building on the outside. It looks like a giant barn with a green roof, because that's who build Assembly of God churches, is barn builders. Come on, it's true. Other than Bethel here, that's a dome. But there's a lot of AG churches that just look like they're built by a barn builder. The Amish come in and they pulled up anyways. So, but John Lindell has such a clarity of vision of what they should and shouldn't do.
Have you ever been to that church?
Oh yeah. I've been there several times. My in-laws live 20 minutes south. So yeah, but again, the pastors that can't clearly define what God's called them to do, when they can't clearly define what the church has been called to do, everything seems like a good idea. Let's try that. Let's try this. Let's do that. Yeah, it seems like a great idea. Let's do that. And oftentimes, the direction that they go in the church is short-lived because whoever's strongest at the time is the one who's going to dictate what they're doing. They got a strong board member that cares a lot about this. All right, we're going to go do that. This is the hard work of being a leader. But if we talk about leading from vision and understanding that one of our roles as a leader is to be the chief cultural architect and to help dictate what happens within the church walls and in the context of what God has called you to do, then that means that you have to make the hard decisions. You have to do the heavy lifting that helps to create the plan for a philosophy of ministry that builds off of vision. We might have talked about this already. Might be in a later class, but the majority of decisions in a church can be made by anybody. Who should drive the van? How do you reserve a van? They're not unimportant decisions, but they're not decisions that the lead pastor needs to make. What kind of paper do they use in the copier? That's a decision that has to be made. It's not the kind of decision that needs to be made by the lead pastor. These are the kind of decisions that need to be made by the leader. These are the decisions. So of the decisions that are made in the church, about 5% have to be made by the leader. What direction are we going in as a church? Who do we hire? What's our focus as a ministry? What's important to us? These are the big. So if we think about it, since I'm in a drawing mood, if we think about it in the context of all the details, paper, curriculum, what color we paint a wall. Who cares about what color we paint a wall? What kind of carpet we're using? Who's driving a van? How do we reserve a van? Who's using this room? Who's doing that? Who's doing this? These are all things that are important decisions, right? But the lead pastor or the leaders, they need to be making these big decisions that everything falls under. That's that 5%, that philosophy of ministry. What strategy are we going to use to reach the lost? What methodology are we going to use to make our services more dynamic and engaging? What are we going to do? Who are we going to hire? What kind of worship leader are we looking for? What are the elements that we're looking for in an employee? What are we looking for in a board? These are the questions that we have to answer. And where does this start? It starts in understanding the vision that God has placed on that church. Leading from vision, developing a philosophy of ministry, so very important for us. And if we don't grasp that, what happens is that ultimately we spend all of our time down here in the unimportant decisions. I had a pastor I worked for. This is the craziest thing. One of his core values was that everybody was to work by 8:30. Not that he was to work by 8:30, but that everybody else was to. So he would call the office at 8:30 on the nose every day, regardless of whether he was going to be there or not.
And ask the receptionist who was there.
Yeah. Yep. Every single day. And so, you'd be in your office, you'd hear the phone ring. All right, there's Scott. We know he's calling. He was never there by 8:30. Dude was never there by 10. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Yeah.
I don't want to scare anybody. I worked with a guy one time. He would drop a piece of trash on the church lawn and see
Yeah.
if that person would pick it up.
Yeah. Yeah. So here you go.
And the ones who didn't got it.
I had a pastor I worked for. The thing that he cared the most about in the building cleanliness was the doors. He could walk through a floor that hadn't been vacuumed, but a mark on a door. Especially, you got to get the maintenance staff to clean that. All right. Okay. Do we want to worry about this giant spot on the ceiling where the water's leaked through? No. So understand, as you can't control what other leaders focus on, but you can control what you focus on. We don't teach time management in this class. I could teach you time management if you wanted, but the same principle falls true here. Do the things that only you can do. Do the things that only you can do. And as the leader, there are certain things that you are the only one able to make that decision. What curriculum we use in children's ministry, even though I'm not the children's pastor, as a family pastor, I do make that decision. Why? Because that's an important decision. It shapes how our kids are experiencing God. I make that decision. Not anybody else. Nobody else is making that decision. There's all sorts of decisions that we make. Budget time's especially a great time to talk about how we spend what we've been allocated. Man, there are certain decisions that other people would decide to spend the money differently than I would, or than the way Pastor Glenn would. We understand our role as leaders is to make the difficult decisions that other people cannot make. And so you as a leader need to understand what are the decisions that you need to make and how do they flow from the vision and philosophy of ministry and affect what you do as a church and how it moves the mission and the vision forward. That's the important thing of understanding leading from vision and understanding the importance of a philosophy of ministry. And I think if we can grasp that as a leader, you have the opportunity to really have a strong impact in the long run in the organization. It's when you get lost in the weeds. You get lost in the little things that don't matter. And that's one of my favorite things. Pastor Glenn has gotten to a point with a lot of things where we'll talk about a change that we're going to make in something, organizationally, and he goes, well, how does this work? And then he'll find himself about 3 questions in before he goes, you know what? I don't need to know. Okay, and just walk away from it, because there's certain things he just doesn't need to know. It's not that he can't know. It's that it's not important. Wrong word. It's not important for him to understand the particulars and details of how we're going to accomplish the vision and mission. He understands that it's going to reach the goal that we've set. We set that all together, right? The strategies, how everything's accomplished specifically. So it's like with this last retreat, Pastor Joel took a bunch of kids to a spiritual retreat this past weekend. I gave it to him. I told him, I want you to take a group of kids to this event. I didn't tell him anything else from there. It was not, I helped him, different advertising points, that kind of stuff. But how he got there logistically, how he registered people, how he advertised, I didn't tell him any of that. Why? Because I had the goal in mind. And if I can't trust him to do that, then I don't need to have him working here. But if you as a leader need to micromanage everybody, then you need to really evaluate, why do you have them working for you if you don't feel like you can trust them? And so that's why Pastor Glenn can say, hey, this is what I want done. And I said, okay. And he starts asking questions and realizes, I don't need to know this. Why? Because he trusts me. He trusts us to get it done. And that comes from knowing that we understand the vision and the mission, the philosophy of ministry we do as a church, and then moving forward there. And so if you end up in a staff position, one of the things that you can do to serve your pastor the best is to understand the vision and the mission and their philosophy of ministry. If you want to help eliminate friction in a staff position, learn to think the way your pastor thinks. So I can tell you oftentimes, without ever hearing Pastor Glenn say it, what he's going to think of something. He and I think pretty similarly. Part of it's just we have a very similar background in church ministry. But I can tell you oftentimes how he's going to feel about stuff before I hear it. Why? It's because we've worked together now for almost 6 years, but also because we have a philosophy of ministry that is very similar. And it helps. So let's do this. We took a little bit longer break. We got into our material a little bit quicker. And the next section is talking about organizational life cycle. And that goes very well with a conversation about change. So would you guys be okay if we stopped here and picked that up next week and incorporated that into change? Taylor, is that okay with you?
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
Oh, wow.
Okay, Taylor, I was really concerned about how that affected Taylor. Yeah.
Is she here?
Yeah.
But
Andrea.
Here?
let me pull up my calendar because we have a project, 7 project next week.
Oh.